everybody. We're going to talk about the hippie trail, but you know what? If we could smoke, we'd be smoking hash, right?
When we were on the hippie trail.
Because that's what the hippie trail was all about, is about going to get the hash, right?
It's a good place to start, yeah.
A good place to start. But since we can't smoke, we just have to imagine that we just took a big hit of some really wonderful, unbelievable Afghani hash, and now we're cruising high at about an altitude of maybe 30,000 feet. But you know what? We went over land to do it, so that was a little bit different.
So I guess the question is, do you know what the hippie trail even is in some ways? I mean, maybe we need to kind of explain what that was. This was, you're looking at, the late 60s, San Francisco, and all around the world, in places where people were getting hip, they were turning into hippies. And people wanted to travel, they wanted to explore the world in ways that hadn't maybe been done since...
Well, a little bit before that. Well, no, actually, part of the thing is after the Second World War, people started to say, let's explore the whole planet. So the hippie movement was really, it kind of started in San Francisco, but there was also all over Chicago, New York, Paris, Berlin, England, London, and so on. It was actually a worldwide phenomenon. But what it was is in San Francisco, where Nikki and I were, in the hippie movement, it was like, where does this pot come from? What's the history of it? What's the culture of it? And then there was also, at the end of the hippie trail, there was this kind of glittering magic culture of India, which we all really wanted to find out about. And our roots were in people like Allen Ginsberg and Gary Snyder and even, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. They all went to India, right, at a certain point, and they talked about it, and then I had some sort of effect on them. So there were a whole lot of us much younger than that who said, wow, that sounds like a great trip, right?
Yeah, it really, there was something about the Indian culture that really attracted hippies. I mean, somebody just last night was telling us that he knew absolutely nothing about the Hindu culture, and he did his first LSD trip, and he got incredibly stoned, and he had visions of this thing. He didn't even know what it was. He went and did research and found out it was Lord Shiva. And so I think there was just something innate that came to us because cannabis does come from that part of the world. It comes from that part of China, from that part of the Hindu Kush. Yeah. And people just, you could feel it when you start to get high and we started to experience these things. It was like a magnet pulling us to that part of the world to really find out, where did this culture come from?
So the first thing is you somehow had to get to London, right? Because London was where it sort of was starting on the trip east. And then what did they have, the magic bus?
Right, you took the magic bus. So, I mean, okay, I took a Greyhound bus across America in 1977 to Montreal. I got on, believe it or not, a Russian Soviet cruise ship.
Can you imagine a Soviet cruise ship?
And that's a whole other story. And that got me to London. How did you actually flew to London? Is that right?
Well,
because we went separately.
Yeah, Nikki and I were not a couple at that point. We
did know each other, though.
Yeah, we did know each other, right. But I was traveling with what we called my old lady at that time, She was my girlfriend. Later on, we had a child together, Melchior. So my old lady and I, Mireille, we took what did we do? We flew from San Francisco to London on Icelandic Airlines, which was really a cheap flight. And then in London, we went to Hyde Park and we took a little bit of acid just to kind of get things moving there. And then we took a ferry across to Belgium, I think it was, and then hitchhiked to Amsterdam, and then hitchhiked across Germany. And then in Austria, we took a train to Istanbul. But on the way in the train, we went through Romania and Bulgaria. It's like, what, are you kidding me? They wouldn't even let us get off the train, right? But when they came through to check our passports, they made us change money because they wanted those dollars. So in exchange for like $20, I got some Romanian dinars, right? So what can I use those for? I don't know. I knew I had them, right? So then we went to Istanbul, and that was a really magic place. And I took a train across Turkey, and then I got to Iran. And you can't even go to Iran today, right? But yeah, we took a bus across Iran, stopped in Tehran and Mashhad, and then we got to Afghanistan. And now all of a sudden, now we're really gone.
So wait. Let me just one thing to add in
Nikki's
here.
got to catch up.
Well, yeah, no, I got to catch up, but I do just want to point out that in the 1970s, when Swami and I were doing, there was still a king in Afghanistan, and there was still a Shah in Iran. So
it's a very different world.
Very, very different kind of situation. And the fact that we could even do that, you can't do these trips any longer. And it was a lot of Europeans doing it too.
Yes.
A lot. And of course, for them, they didn't have to get all the way from America to start. So they were starting from Europe. And there were these bonds made because, and you know, it's sort of like when you sit next to someone on an airplane and you're never going to see them again, so you might as well tell them everything, including your deepest, darkest secrets. That's kind of what it was like. These bonds were forming about people from all around the world of this hippie culture. And we were making a tribe is what happened.
Yeah, and they came from Rome, and they came from Berlin and London, and it was just really a sort of, now, at the time we thought everybody was doing it, but of course there was very, very few people who really did it, but we were going across by land, right, and that's something that the ancient caravans did, all the way from China to Europe and so on. So we're kind of going back in time and going back in history, right? And so at a certain point, we're now in Afghanistan, and they have a king still, right?
And when you get to Afghanistan, and this is probably still true, I imagine, there was no train. So up until Afghanistan, you could take trains and buses and different forms of transportation. When you got to Afghanistan, there was no trains. And the reason is Afghanistan was never conquered. You know, the British never got Afghanistan, where they put all those trains into India and everywhere else.
Them, and we never did either as Americans.
They're just incredibly strong, independent people. So when you get to Afghanistan, now all of a sudden you're resorting to a camel, you know, a bullock cart.
There were no cars hardly. A
really,
few old,
really funky
like
old buses.
Yeah, funky.
Right. Sometimes they had like old 1950 Chevys that they would drive around, and you could catch a ride on one of those.
So we get to Kabul by bus, and then in Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan, they said, well, there's this place in the middle of the country called Bamiyan, and another place called Bandi Amir, and they're really, but you have to understand, Afghanistan basically has no trees. Right, it's just pretty barren. And then you drive along, and we got on this bus, an old school bus, and there's like 30 people on the roof of the bus, right? And we're all just crammed in, and there's bags of grain, and I mean, it's really down home, a little bit like it used to be going to Mexico, right? And so we're on this bus, and now off in the distance you see on top of a hill what looks like a fortress. There's no other houses around. There's a fortress built out of adobe and so on. And this is a culture, it's a tribal culture. And they've been constantly, there's a thing about Afghanistan. The tribes, there are about 5 major tribes. They all fight each other all the time. The only time they don't fight each other is when there's a foreign invader. And then they join together to kick out the foreign invader, and they always do, right? So Afghanistan has this certain sort of, I don't know, there's a pride in those people and a long tradition of being independent.
Well, and not to mention, they do, to this day, I would believe, make the best hashish in the world. And I don't know what it is. It's what they grow, where they grow. It's their terroir. It's what's happening there. It's what we used to call one-toke blackout. And that's a little graphic, but it actually was true.
Yeah.
And it was just thick, dark, black hash.
Yeah.
And it was super cheap, you know, I don't know, 20 cents a gram or something in dollars. And once you got to Afghanistan, you kind of didn't want to leave. You just wanted to stay there and smoke this stuff.
So I just got across the border by bus into Afghanistan. I'm in the immigration compound. Right? And I'm just hanging out there, and some young guy comes up, and right there in immigration wants to sell me some hash, right? So I say, okay, Charles, I'll buy some, right? And so I pull out some dollars to pay him, and then I show him the dinars I had that I got in Romania. And lo and behold, this guy wants to get the dinars. because he was collecting different kinds of money from all over the world. So I actually changed my dinars into hash, which was a great thing, right? Right. And then I had some hash, and then Mireille and I smoked it, and then what we found is we're back in the hotel, and people are just sort of spying on us. What are they doing with it? How are they getting stoned, and so on. But anyway, that was a great experience to just in customs to get hash.
So, my little story from Afghanistan. So I was like 21 years old, young flower child from San Francisco, traveling with my boyfriend. And, we're going overland to India, hanging out with great people along the way. And when it came time, we'd been in Afghanistan for about 2 or 3 weeks, and it's like, come on, I really want to get to India. But we still got this hash. And this hash is too good. We cannot just throw this stuff away. What are we going to do with it? Well, I know. Let's press it really, really thin, and we'll put it in an envelope. And we'll put some photographs in that envelope as well. And then we're going to send it to some friends in Marin County. And they're going to just love this. Great idea. So we go to the post office, because in those days, if you were mailing anything abroad, you had to actually take your letter up to the counter where they would weigh it and put the postage on it. Innocent little Nikki at 21 years old does this while the boyfriend waits outside. And little did I know the post office was right next door to the main police station in Kabul, and that the two men behind the counter, one of them was a cop. And they just went and opened up my letter. And I'm like, wait a minute, you can't do that in America. This is private property, But they just slit this thing open, took out the hash, and said, what are you doing? We're going to put you in jail. So they take me in a back room, and I'm going to share with you a little information most people don't know. Afghanistan was run by the Germans before the Russians came in. So this was 1977. I think the Russians came in 79, early 79. And they took me in a back little room. They sat me down. They put a bright light in my face so I couldn't see what I was looking at. And all I could hear was this voice out of an old World War II movie saying, "We could put you away for 6 years. We know that you know major smugglers in Kabul." And I didn't know anybody. I'm this innocent little girl. So they did send me to jail. And luckily, my boyfriend, who was left outside, found a district attorney. And I only spent one night in jail. Now, that one night, I did not know it was going to be one night. I thought it could be up to 6 years. So I was a little frightened. But I have to tell you, in retrospect, it was one of the best experiences of my life to see how an Afghani jail works. And these women that felt so liberated in jail, honestly, because they were running around in miniskirts and makeup and taught me how to belly dance. And
well, but wait a second. The women in Afghanistan, they wear a full burqa, which is a dark green or black cover, which covers their head all the way down to their ankles, right? And only the thing they can see out of is a little crisscross of fabric here. So in the street, first of all, you almost never see any women on the street in Afghanistan in those days, and they're covered completely from head to toe. But underneath, that's what Nikki saw, right? They're tripping out.
This is like, and none of them spoke English, and I'm like, they're like, why am I in here? I could understand that. Oh, hashish, hashish. Why are you in here? And they would all just go like this. And when I finally asked the district attorney what that meant, it said that they either succeeded or attempted to kill their husbands. And they did it because they were having so much more fun in jail. So that gives you kind of an idea of what was going on in that country. But on the other hand, it was great. These women were so free-spirited, so kind to me, living in absolute deplorable conditions I won't even get into in this prison. I did, get out the next day. It took me about 2 months to get out of the country. They took my passport. And I had to go and push my paperwork through at the courthouse every day, 6 days a week. Otherwise, I would have still been there. It took 45 signatures, and I had to make sure that kept going through. On the last day, they finally escorted me up to this plush office on the top floor where the judge was. And the judge says, "Okay, so you say that you were mailing this for a friend. You didn't know the hashish was in there. We're going to fine you $100. So by now I'd been on the road long enough. I knew you could bargain for anything in these countries. So I pulled out my fake student ID card and said I'd give him 50, and he agreed. And that's how it worked in those days. They gave me back my passport, and we were out of there the next day, onwards, finally, to India, a quick sojourn through Pakistan. Not so much to do in Pakistan.
Well, but wait a second. We got to talk about the Khyber Pass. You've
Oh,
probably
yeah, the
heard
Khyber
about the
Pass,
Khyber
yeah.
Pass, right? And that's the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And so it's just so mythic because you've always heard about the Khyber Pass. And we just went through there. And, of course, there wasn't any computer or anything like they had stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and everything was handwritten, right? But anyway.
But the Khyber Pass is basically a very, very narrow mountain road, and it goes right through these steep mountains. So it's famous because when the British came in to conquer Afghanistan, they thought, they came in via the Khyber Pass, where all of the Afghanis were just right up in the hills, decimated them. Yeah. The Brits turned around, basically.
That's the movie, The Man Who Would Be King.
Yeah. So we got... to get over the Khyber Pass, the best way, the only way really, was these very, very old, mostly American cars that they had. And they would pile people into the cars, into the trunks of the cars. When you got to the top of the Khyber Pass, there was a little village called Landi Kotal. I'll never forget that. Really? Landi Kotal. And all it had was, it was like a bazaar, meaning a little marketplace with these little shacks. And each shack was either selling guns or drugs. That's what it was. It was either opium, hashish, or old Enfield rifles that the British had left behind. And so this is before the Russians, before the Americans. They did not have any fancy weaponry at all. And that was a very trippy place. I mean, it really, truly was going back in time. The experience, I mean, I just feel so fortunate we did this when we could.
Well, Afghanistan was a time back in time also because there were almost no cars. There were camels, there were horses, there were these ancient mosques that were totally beautiful, turquoise tiles and so on. But everything else was just adobe. It was really like stepping back into like 1500 or something like that. So then you come down from the Khyber Pass where there's no trees, it's all rocks, it's brown, everything. You come into Pakistan and all of a sudden it's just green everywhere because now you're in the tropics of the Indian subcontinent.
And at this point, for me anyway, just so you get a little relative of time, it's been about 6 months since I left San Francisco, you know. Right. But so just to put it into perspective, like Marco Polo or all of the old travelers, there were great adventurers that took the Silk Route to Asia. You know, it took them a long time because they were doing it by camel or horse or whatever they could do, and you know, we at least had some actual transportation, some vehicles. Right. A long time.
Well, we could spend a lot more time in Afghanistan, but then we would never get to India. So now we're in India, and India's all green and everything, and I get on a train at the border to go to New Delhi, and the train is so packed and crowded, there are like 20 people on the roof of each car, right? And I got a backpack, and my old lady Mireille, we just barely have enough room to sit on the floor. That's how crowded the train was, right? And you're riding into New Delhi and so on. Well, eventually we made it to Varanasi and up into Nepal and so on. And all along the way, you're getting little hash here, little hash there, because they don't really sell flour there. It's not really like they're selling cannabis.
No,
right?
The flour grown in India wasn't so good. It still isn't. They really don't have the idea of sensimilla down yet because they're growing it for the seeds, partly. They use those seeds to eat. Cannabis seed has amazing protein. And when you have a limited diet, especially if you're a vegetarian Hindu, you really use those seeds. They sell hemp seed here in America. So you mix those seeds into their curries. And that's where they get a lot of their protein. And besides, when you're making hashish, or charas as they call it in India, you don't need to have a female plant. Any plant will do. So they're just going and rubbing those plants to make the hashish. However, what I did find is what they would sell as flour, which was not even as good as anything I ever got from Mexico in the late 60s. But you could cook with it still. It doesn't matter with cannabis, you know. It can be really raggy weed. But once you do the decarboxylation process, which means heating it up, it releases all of the THC in there, and you get just as high eating an edible that you make from really crappy weed, pardon my French, as opposed to you don't need to use your best weed to make your edibles.
Well, the leaves
actually.
still have plenty of cannabinoids and so on. So my first time I actually had cannabis in India is, this is a year before on this trip. I was traveling in India as a filmmaker, as a cameraman. And we're in Varanasi, and at the hotel they bring in this very famous Indian dancer of the Bharatanatyam style of classical Indian dance, and I'm supposed to film her. So I'm in the dressing room with her band and her whole crew and so on, and one of them says, hey, you should really try this drink. It's our famous drink, right? It's bong. It's a cannabis smoothie, right? So I'm thinking, oh, I'm a hippie. I've been smoking dope in San Francisco. Sure, I'll do it. So I drink this thing. Well, it was one of those edibles where you wish you hadn't drunk twice as much, right? So now I've got to pick up my big camera, put on a magazine, put on my battery belt, and go out and right in front of the whole audience and film this dancer. Meanwhile, I'm starting to peak on this edible, right, on this thing. Well, the dancer was just beautiful, and then she turned into a goddess right in front of me, and then it's all a blur after that, right? I was just totally obliterated. But that was my first, and then lo and behold, I find out that that's the way that this famous god of India, Shiva, that Nikki just talked about, our friend had a vision of, that's his favorite drink. He's always drinking this cannabis smoothie, right? And so the Lord Shiva, Lord of the dance, Lord of yoga, Lord of meditation, he's just stoned out of his gourd the whole time because he's constantly drinking this stuff. So that was my introduction to cannabis in India right that first time. So it's potent stuff. And it's made just from the leaves, mind you. It's not made from the flowers. It's just made from the leaves. This is called bhang, B-H-A-N-G.
No, it's an interesting thing because in India, cannabis has been part of their culture forever. I mean, really. Now, of course, when America decided to make it so illegal back in the Anslinger days, that fear of such an innocent medicative plant was taken around the world and shared, unfortunately. So it is illegal in India. However, even now, there are certain very holy temple towns that are specifically temple towns dedicated to Lord Shiva, where you will find a little shop and they can legally sell you hashish. They make the bong smoothies. They do you can get just about anything under the counter, actually. But they will legally sell you these things in those places. And they have a certain festival every year called Holi, which is it's always right at the start of spring. And the tradition is that they get these powders, these colored powders, and they throw it at each other. And everyone just goes crazy that day. But to get loose enough to be able to go out and throw colored powders at each other on the street, they all drink these cannabis smoothies. So everyone in the family. So they're not afraid of it in that sense. You know what? The stigma that has traveled around the world so wrongly, has seeped into these countries where they know deep down in their hearts there's nothing wrong with this.
Yeah. Well, it's the American politics that forced these countries to outlaw the cannabis for sure. So it kind of comes back on us to liberate it for that. And see, there's a whole kind of medicine in India, like Chinese medicine, but it's Indian medicine. It's called Ayurvedic medicine. And they've been using cannabis in their herbal mixtures for thousands of years, and it's still going. There are Ayurvedic stores in India where you can now buy little pills that have cannabis in them, right? And there are government shops also where you can buy cannabis, or not cannabis, you buy hashish, right? So after going through India, then most of us ended up in Nepal. And that's up in the mountains. It's a whole mountain. And they grow some really amazing cannabis up there. And they also have the hashish and so on. So I went to just a regular shop and bought a chunk of hashish about the size of a hot dog roll, right? And it cost like $10, right? Now, this was 1971, so it's been a while ago, right? But out on the street, you could meet someone, and he'd come up to you, and he'd say, you want some charas? And you'd see this thing, it was wrapped in a corn husk, right? And again, it was about the size of an ear of corn, but it was all hashish. And so that's where you start there. And it was just so part of the culture. And there's another festival called Shivaratri where everybody in the village, and they don't just always do smoothies, they'll do baked goods, like cookies or cakes or something like that have it. And I remember one time in Kathmandu, I'm up there, and someone says, oh, you got to go to the cabin restaurant because they have these little cakes, and they have these little things in them, and you look at the cake and it's got little like chocolate chips in it. It's not chocolate chips. It's little chunks of hash, right? So I ate one of these whole little cakes that you can get there, and all of a sudden, I'm flat on my back, and I'm literally out of my body looking down at my body because I've just had this experience of overdosing kind of a little bit. And then once you get over wow, what happened, right? Then you just go with it and you fly with it, and now you're kind of on your own magic carpet. But it was just like, if you go to the cabin restaurant, make sure you only eat half that cake, right? Because those are not chocolate chips, right?
And so obviously what happened next is that you got all these hippies going overland through Afghanistan to India, smoking this amazing hash, and realizing, just like I did in Afghanistan, I can't just leave this here. I got to share this with my friends at home. So the smuggling business became a big deal. And there is a part of India called Goa. And Goa is on the southwest coast. And it was one of the few parts of India that the British didn't conquer, but the Portuguese did. And the Portuguese have always been traders. That's a nice way to put it, traders. And they used to actually just take a lot of spices from India.
And cashews.
And nuts and all that stuff, and send that back to via the Middle East, because it's not that far across the Arabian Sea, and then take it back to Europe. So it was a natural place. These people had been basically smuggling gold and herbs for a long time. And so when the hippies came in and said, okay, we want to now get some of this hash back to our own country, it was a natural progression. That there were a lot of freaks, as we called ourselves in those days, freaks, and they started going into the business. And so people changed their names. Obviously this was a very undercover sort of thing. We can talk about it now, all these years later. I never would have spoken about this about 10 years ago.
Nobody had a last name in those days.
No, everyone was named. There was Mushroom Jack, Acid Eric, Chicago, Amsterdam Dave. Everybody had another name. And they partied because these people were making a lot of money actually doing these smuggling trips. And then they would bring it back to Goa to buy more hash, but also to put on amazing parties. Goa became party central in India, and it is to this day party central.
So
you don't have all the
trance
smugglers
music,
anymore. That's not so
trance
much.
Music, psytrance, all
Yeah.
came out of Goa. But see, the thing is, the hash would be grown up in the mountains of the Himalayas in northern India, in a province called Himachal Pradesh or Uttar Pradesh, and so on. And it would come down. The hippies would bring it down to Goa and pack it up and ship it out from there. And so there were false bottom suitcases, there were hollow legs and furniture, all these things people were sending back. And it really was a pretty major business. And Goa became a total international center. People from all over Europe, Germany, Portugal, Spain, Italy, England, Amsterdam, Denmark, and then also from Japan and from Mexico, all over the world, people were coming into Goa. So we had one of the truly international societies in Goa. And we rented a house there we'd rent it for the whole year. It would cost us $1,500 to rent this house, which was maybe as big as this end of the whole thing. And it was tile on the roof and terrazzo floors.
Yeah,
it was
Portuguese
great.
style.
Portuguese style. And we're 50 yards from the ocean, right? Up on a thing. There are also bougainvillea. I mean, it was just gorgeous. Palm trees and everything. And there's all these international hippies from all over. And I'll tell you, we threw some good parties, right? And and it's all fueled by this cannabis.
So Goa was often the end destination for the hippie trail. That a lot of people were going to get to Goa. They wanted to get to Goa by Christmas for the big party on New Year's. You know, that was always the big goal. And it was quite a scene. But then people would travel from out of there, you know, and that's when Swami, I'll let you all know his name was William then, and we would travel a lot out into temples. We were constantly visiting temples. That was what our passion was. And everybody had their thing. You know, in India, we all spent so many years there. The people were very, very welcoming to us. Wonderful people, wonderful people.
So one thing also about being a traveler on the hippie trail is that, okay, you're going along, and you keep meeting the same people because they're always the same places that everybody's going, so you develop those friendships over time. But what we always try to do is get someplace and rent a house. So we're not just living in a hotel, living on hotel food and all of that, right? Because you pretty often can get sick and you're constantly changing. So up in the mountains, we had a house where we'd stay for 3 or 4 months. In Goa, we had a house where we'd stay for 4 or 5 months. And then when you do that, then you start cooking your own food. And then you're really on the level with the actual people who live there. So you go to the market and you buy food in the market and you buy the grains and you buy some pots and pans and you start cooking. So you're living there. You're not just a tourist traveling and staying in hotels and then you're only hanging out with the other people traveling who are Western. So you get to really know, and you go to the village market, you get to know the people who actually live there because you're living in the house and you're kind of living at their level in a certain way. And so then you see the culture differently as well.
And so my first trip, when I did that overland trip in '77, it was for me, I was gone for a little over a year. Everything, including all of my transportation from San Francisco overland across the country, that Russian cruise ship, all across Asia, all the way to Thailand, all the way back to San Francisco, cost me $2,500 exactly.
Can't do that today,
Yeah.
folks. That's for
So,
sure. In
yeah.
fact, you
No,
can't even
yeah.
do that trip today overland.
No, you can't.
There's no way, right, that you can go through Iran and Afghanistan these days. And so it's really an amazing really thing to be there. And see, the overland trip was many varied. Like you could get a magic bus in London and go on the same bus all the way to Kathmandu, right? But we didn't do that. Right. Nikki said she told the ship, but we always took the local buses. We'd go, 200 miles to the next town on a local bus. So you're really hanging out with all the other. Some people actually got a car in Germany, whatever, and drove all the way through. So once again, you're isolated. But we traveled with the local transportation. We always took local buses and so on. So you've got the chickens and the goats with you, and the people up on the roof, and the bags of grain, and so on. And what happens is then you don't speak the language, and in many of those places you can't even read the alphabet, right? So what you develop is your sixth sense. Is this a safe place? Am I going to be all right here? And so many times it really comes down to the smell. Like I go into a restaurant.
It's all about the terpenes.
I go into a restaurant and I say, something smells weird here. I don't know. I walk into another restaurant. Oh, this smells really good. So you really rely on your other senses, not your literal reading sense, not your rational sense, your intuitive sense. So it really develops your sort of intuitive sense, and you get to look at someone and you judge their vibe from their smile and the look in their eye, and you say, okay, I'm okay here, or oh man, this feels really weird. I'm out of here, right? And you learn to respond to that without questioning it. You say, oh no, it's okay, it's okay. No, it's not okay. Get out of there. Or yeah, it's totally okay. Sit back and enjoy yourself.
So over the years, a lot of us that did the hippie trail kept going back and kept going back. Not necessarily overland any longer. That wasn't always possible. Swami and I ended up living there for quite a bit of about 12 years, from about 86 till 98, more or less, I guess. And on and off occasionally we'd come back to America. I was working here for a while.
Well, but at one point, Nikki and I did separate. We actually separated as a couple. So I spent about 3 years mostly by myself up in the mountains when I would meditate 4 times a day and just, eat a little bit and sleep maybe 3 or 4 hours and then I would be reading all these sacred books and chanting and so on, doing yoga, and then encountering Babas and other holy men along the way just to deepen my practice and so on. So meanwhile, Nikki was back in San Francisco, and then she'd come and visit me from time to time in India.
So anyway, the moral of the story is it changed our lives.
Totally.
And this was an experience, and it changed a lot of lives, and it changed a lot of the cannabis culture because we were responsible for bringing that hashish back, for getting it to people
Well, wait a second.
here.
We never smuggled anything back from India.
I got caught in Afghanistan, remember?
But you didn't smuggle. You didn't get it there.
I didn't get it there, you're right. No, that kind of opened up my eyes. That wasn't meant to be my profession.
No, not to be a smuggler.
Anyway, I think we're about to wrap this up. Are there any pressing questions? Yes, Keiko. Well, that's a whole other
another
story.
right?
We met in 1969. That's how long we've known each other.
And I was with my old lady Mireille, and she was 14, and I'm 12 years older than her. So we were just friends. We had a whole kind of group, a commune in North Beach in San Francisco, a bunch of artists. So that's how we got to know each other. But we've actually been married 3 times.
To each other.
To each other. We got married, we separated, we got a divorce, we got married again. And then the 3rd time we got married was the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love. So we got married again at that point, and just... You have a question?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks
Thank
for
you.
listening, folks, and I tell you, it was an experience of a lifetime to see various countries in a way that they were unchanged for hundreds of years. Now they've all changed. As you well know, Afghanistan's been through all kind of crazy stuff. Pakistan also, even Iran, Iraq. It's just so different to have been there and seen that original culture and so on. So we're really blessed to be able to do that. If we can pass a little of it on to you, because we have a cannabis culture in Northern California as well, and we're developing a cannabis culture all over this country. And the heart and soul of it is from cannabis, and the heart and soul of it really is the love that goes into the plant and the love of our community and the shared knowledge that we have. So the thing that we want to do as we move into more commercial cannabis is keep that community, keep that sense of love and the respect and honoring of the plant, which is the source of it.
Right, so we are our own tribe. And thank you all for being part of that tribe with us.
Thank you.
We love you all. Om Namah Shivaya.